Racist detective kicks. John Kennedy in open court. What happens next? Destroys his life forever. The Louisiana courtroom buzzed with a quiet intensity, the kind that hums beneath the surface when a room full of people senses something big is about to happen. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of courtroom 3B, casting golden streaks across the polished marble floor and the worn wooden benches, where families, reporters, and curious onlookers sat shoulder to shoulder. The air carried the faint scent of old wood and anticipation, as if the walls themselves knew they were about to witness history. Behind the judicial bench sat United States Senator John Neely Kennedy, a man whose reputation for integrity and dogged pursuit of justice had made him a formidable figure in Louisiana and beyond. His presence in this small courtroom was unusual, but Kennedy was no stranger to stepping into the fray when the stakes were high. Today, he was here to oversee a case that had raised red flags in the community. A case involving Malik Thompson, a 15-year-old black teenager charged with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. The accusations, typed in the sterile language of police reports, bore the name of Detective Ryan Crawford, an officer whose name had surfaced too often in troubling stories. Kennedy adjusted his glasses, his sharp eyes scanning the file before him, his calm demeanor masking the weight of what he had been investigating for months. The heavy courtroom doors swung open, and Detective Ryan Crawford entered with a swagger that filled the space. At 6'2", with a frame built from years of tactical training, Crawford moved like a man who owned every room he entered. His navy blue uniform was pristine, his duty belt clinking softly with each step, a reminder of the power he carried. His pale gray eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Malik Thompson, who sat in the front row, his school uniform pressed and neat, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Malik's mother Angela sat beside him, her arm around her son, clutching a folder of his achievements, honor roll, certificates, teacher letters, evidence of a boy whose only offense seemed to be crossing paths with Crawford. When Crawford's gaze shifted to Senator Kennedy, a flicker of dismissiveness crossed his face, as if he saw the senator as a temporary obstacle rather than a serious threat. Kennedy, however, met the look with a steady gaze, his years of experience giving him an uncanny ability to read men like Crawford officers who believed their badges shielded them from accountability. The case was straightforward on paper: Malik Thompson accused of disorderly conduct and resisting lawful commands after an encounter at a bus stop. The report described Malik as showing aggressive behavior and failure to comply respectfully. But Kennedy had seen this kind of language before, vague, repetitive, and suspiciously targeted at black youth. For weeks, he had been quietly collecting complaints from community members about Crawford's tactics, stories of teenagers stopped for no reason, harassed for standing with friends, or arrested for minor infractions that never stuck in court, but left lasting scars. Kennedy's sharp mind had already begun piecing together a pattern. Crawford's arrests overwhelmingly involved black teenagers charged with flimsy offenses that seemed designed to intimidate rather than uphold the law. Today, the senator was here not just to observe, but to ensure that truth, not power, would carry the day. As the bailiff called the court to order, a hush settled over the room. Kennedy's voice, clear and steady, cut through the silence. "Detective Crawford, please take the stand and describe the events leading to Mr. Thompson's arrest." His tone was professional, but carried the weight of a man who had spent years holding powerful people accountable. Crawford settled into the witness chair with a casual arrogance, his posture relaxed as if he were untouchable. "Senator," he began, his voice smooth but tinged with condescension, "I was on routine patrol in the South Side when I saw a group of kids loitering at the bus stop on 4th and Magnolia. With recent reports of petty crime, I conducted a safety check." Kennedy's pen moved across his notepad, his face unreadable, but his mind was already dissecting the euphemism. Safety check was Crawford's go-to phrase, but to the South Side community it meant harassment, random stops of kids doing nothing wrong. How many kids were in this group? Detective Kennedy asked, his eyes locking onto Crawford's. The detective shifted slightly, still confident but wary. 5, Senator. 4 boys and 1 girl, all around 14 to 17. Kennedy nodded. And only Malik Thompson was arrested. Why, the question was simple but sharp, and the room seemed to lean in. Crawford's composure flickered, his eyes darting to the prosecutor's table for support that didn't come. The others scattered when I approached, he said, his voice tightening. Thompson showed behaviors that needed intervention. Kennedy leaned forward, his gaze unrelenting. What behaviors, Detective B specific? The spectators held their breath, sensing the tension building like a storm about to break. Crawford's jaw tripartitan, but he kept his tone steady. He kept eye contact when I told the group to disperse. When I spoke to him directly, he didn't look down or acknowledge my authority. His posture was confrontational, hands in pockets, shoulders squared. The words hit the room like stones, stirring murmurs from the gallery. Angela Thompson gripped her son's hand, her face a mix of anger and disbelief, as she heard her son's arrest justified by something as simple as eye contact. Kennedy's expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened. "So, Detective," he said, his voice cutting, "you're saying that eye contact and hands in pockets constitute disorderly conduct." The question was a trap, and the room felt it. Crawford's face flushed slightly, but he doubled down. "In my experience, Senator, those can be signs of aggression. We're trained to spot these things to prevent trouble." Kennedy made a deliberate note, his movements slow and precise. "And what, in your view, is appropriate behavior for a 15-year-old black teenager during a police stop?" The question landed with precision, forcing Crawford to either admit to shaky reasoning or reveal his biases. The detective shifted his hands, clenching the armrests. "Same as anyone, comply immediately, speak respectfully, no attitude." Kennedy's pen scratched again. "So questioning an officer or maintaining eye contact is an attitude problem." The room crackled with tension, the spectators sensing that Crawford was being backed into a corner. His voice rose, a hint of irritation breaking through. "Questions can be arguments in disguise, Senator. Respect means doing what you're told first and asking questions later." The answer exposed more than Crawford meant to reveal, hinting at a world view where any challenge to authority was suspect. Kennedy's mind raced, connecting the detective's words to the data he had reviewed. Black teens in Crawford's area were arrested at rates far higher than their white peers, despite no difference in crime stats. Detective Kennedy said, his voice steady but firm. "How many juveniles have you arrested for behavioral issues in your 15 years on the force?" Crawford's eyebrows rose, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "I don't keep a tally, Senator. Maybe 50 or 60. Most get resolved fast, kids learn their place." Kennedy's eyes narrowed. "And what percentage of those were minority juveniles?" The question hit like a dart, and Crawford's confidence wavered. "I don't track race," he said, his voice defensive. "I respond to behavior." Kennedy leaned forward. "Give an estimate, Detective." Half more, Crawford's hands clenched into fists. "I patrol a diverse area. Arrests reflect that." Kennedy consulted his notes. "Your patrol area is 35% black. Do your arrests match that?" The question was a blade cutting through Crawford's deflections. The detective's face paled, his voice desperate. "With respect, Senator, race isn't the issue here. This is about one kid's behavior." Kennedy's gaze didn't waver. Patterns matter, detective. When arrests show racial disparities, it questions your judgment. Crawford's composure cracked, his voice rising. I've served 15 years risking my life for this community, including people who don't appreciate it. The jab was clear, and the room felt it. Kennedy remained calm. Your service isn't the issue, detective. Your methods are, especially when they seem to target kids based on race. Crawford's restraint snapped. He stood, his frame towering over the courtroom, his voice a snarl. You think you can lecture me from that bench? This is about politics, not justice. Gasps rippled through the gallery, and Angela Thompson held her son tighter. Kennedy stayed seated, his voice steady. This is about whether a boy can exist without being criminalized for his skin. Crawford took a step toward the bench, his face red with rage. You people always make it about race when it's about respect. The phrase "you people" landed like a bomb, revealing Crawford's prejudice. Kennedy's eyes burned with resolve. Your words betray you, detective. This court will hear more about your methods. Crawford's face twisted, and he took another step, his voice a growl. You think you're untouchable because of your title. In a flash of rage, he swung his leg, his boot slamming into Kennedy's midsection. The crack echoed through the courtroom, sending the senator staggering back. Chaos erupted. Spectators screamed, officers rushed forward, and Angela pulled Malik close. Crawford stood over Kennedy, sneering. That's what happens when you meddle. But Kennedy, clutching his side, stood tall, his voice unwavering. Let the record show, Detective Crawford assaulted a United States senator in open court. As officers tackled Crawford, Kennedy reached for a folder, its contents ready to unravel a web of corruption. The detective's arrogance had just ignited his downfall, and Kennedy's resolve promised that justice was only beginning. The courtroom was still reeling from the chaos of Detective Ryan Crawford's assault on Senator John Neely Kennedy, the echo of his boot striking the senator's midsection, lingering like a thunderclap. Spectators whispered in stunned disbelief, their eyes darting between the restrained detective, now pinned to the floor by court security, and Kennedy, who stood slowly clutching his side, but radiating a quiet, unshakable resolve. The marble walls of courtroom 3B seemed to close in the air, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. A police officer had attacked a United States senator in open court, an act so brazen it defied comprehension. But Kennedy, his face pale but composed, knew this moment was not the end, but the beginning of a reckoning. The folder on the bench, thick with months of carefully gathered evidence, held the key to unraveling not just Crawford's crimes, but a network of corruption that had festered in the shadows for years. As security officers wrestled Crawford into handcuffs, his face a mix of rage and dawning fear, Kennedy's steady voice cut through the chaos. Let us proceed, he said, his tone calm but commanding, signaling to the room that justice would not be derailed by violence. The spectators settled their attention, locked on the senator, sensing that what came next would shake the foundations of the local justice system. Kennedy opened the folder, his movements deliberate, revealing a stack of documents, printouts, and a small USB drive that glinted under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. Detective Crawford, he began, his voice carrying the weight of months of preparation. Before your actions just now, you testified about your arrest of Malik Thompson. Let's discuss another case, one that never made it to trial. Crawford's eyes widened, his struggles against the officers slowing as a flicker of panic crossed his face. Kennedy held up a single sheet, its edges worn from handling, bearing the unmistakable seal of the local police department. This is your initial report from an incident 2 years ago involving a 16-year-old black teenager named Jamal Carter, who was shot during what you described as a routine stop gone wrong. Do you recall this incident? The room went still. The name Jamal Carter drawing gasps from the gallery. Angela Thompson. Malik's mother leaned forward, her hands tightening around her son's, her eyes burning with a mix of grief and anticipation. Crawford's voice, now hoarse, cracked as he spoke. That case was investigated and closed, Senator. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. Kennedy's gaze didn't waver, his expression, a blend of calm authority and righteous determination. Cleared, you say? Yet this original report, filed hours after the shooting, tells a different story from the official version. He held the document higher, letting the courtroom see the handwritten notes scrawled in Crawford's own script. You wrote, "Subject appeared to be moving away when shots were fired. No weapon visible at time of engagement." Yet the final report claims Jamal Carter was advancing aggressively with a weapon in hand. Can you explain this discrepancy? Crawford's face paled, his hands trembling in the cuffs as he stammered. Preliminary reports are often inaccurate, Senator. Stress of the moment, things get clarified later. Kennedy's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp but controlled. Clarified or rewritten to cover up a murder. The word murder hit the room like a shockwave, and Crawford's head snapped up, his eyes wild with desperation. You can't call it that. The investigation proved I acted in self-defense. Kennedy set the report down and picked up the USB drive, holding it between his fingers like a weapon of truth. Then, let's examine the evidence that was conveniently lost during that investigation. He nodded to the court administrator, Maria Rodriguez, who had been standing by with a laptop, her face set with quiet determination. She inserted the drive, and the courtroom's large monitor flickered to life, displaying a media player interface. Crawford's face drained of all color, his body slumping as if the fight had left him. What the court is about to see, Kennedy announced, his voice steady, is unedited body camera footage from your encounter with Jamal Carter, obtained by a whistleblower who refused to let this truth stay buried. Crawford lunged forward against the officer's grip, his voice a desperate shout. That footage was sealed. It's inadmissible. Kennedy's expression didn't change, but his eyes burned with resolve. Sealed by whom? Detective? By those protecting you. The truth doesn't stay sealed when good people refuse to stay silent. The monitor displayed a timestamp, the low-resolution footage jerky but clear, capturing a dark street lit by flickering streetlights. The sound of Crawford's breathing filled the courtroom, accompanied by the distant hum of traffic. Subject spotted moving between parked cars. Crawford's recorded voice said, calm and professional. The camera showed a slight figure, Jamal Carter, wearing a hoodie and jeans, moving carefully, his hands visible, no weapon in sight. He looked like a kid trying to avoid trouble, not cause it. Please, officer, I'm just going home. Jamal's voice came through young and scared. I work at the corner store. I didn't do anything. Crawford's recorded response was cold. Subject displaying suspicious behavior. Assessing compliance. The footage showed Jamal raising his hands, backing against a wall, his voice trembling. I don't have a weapon. You can check me. But Crawford's voice hardened. Subject reaching toward waistband. Threat detected. The camera showed no such movement. Jamal's hands remained raised, his body pressed against the wall in fear. Then 3 sharp gunshots rang out, and Jamal crumpled to the ground, motionless. The courtroom erupted in gasps and muffled sobs. Angela Thompson covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the cold execution of another mother's child. Crawford, still restrained, shouted, "That's out of context." There were reports of armed suspects in the area. Kennedy's voice cut through like a blade. There were no such reports. Detective, I've reviewed the radio logs. No calls, no alerts, just a boy walking home from work. He held up another document, a time-stamped log showing no police activity in the area that night. Crawford's face was now ashen, his earlier arrogance replaced by raw panic. "You don't understand the pressure of the job," he stammered. "Split-second decisions, life or death." Kennedy leaned forward, his voice unwavering. What we just saw was not a split-second decision. It was a deliberate act against an unarmed child begging for his life. The senator reached into the folder again, pulling out a transcript of a recorded conversation, its pages marked with evidence tags. "Let's move to another piece of evidence," Kennedy said, his tone measured but relentless. "This is a recording of you speaking with your supervisor, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, at a local diner 6 months ago. Would you like me to play it for the court?" Crawford's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "That's private. You can't use that," he shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. Kennedy nodded to Maria, who loaded the audio file. The speakers crackled with the ambient noise of clinking glasses and muffled chatter. Then Crawford's voice emerged slightly slurred but unmistakable. "Hayes, you know how it is with these kids. They walk around like they own the place. Carter was one of those needed to be taught a lesson." Hayes's voice responded with a harsh laugh. "You did what you had to, Ryan. As long as the report says threat, no one's gonna dig deeper." Crawford's recorded laugh was chilling. "Exactly. A little paperwork magic, and it's just another closed case." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of Crawford's words sinking in. Spectators exchanged horrified glances, realizing they were hearing a police officer casually admit to fabricating evidence to justify a killing. Angela Thompson's shoulders shook with silent sobs, her son gripping her hand tightly. Kennedy's voice broke the silence, calm but piercing. "Detective, you just described murdering a 16-year-old as teaching a lesson. You and your supervisor discussed falsifying reports to cover it up. Do you have anything to say?" Crawford's face cycled through emotions, fear, anger, desperation. "That was just talk," he shouted. "Cops vent to cope with the job. You're twisting it." Kennedy's eyes didn't waver. "There's no twisting needed when your own words condemn you." Kennedy held up another document, this one a complaint filed by Jamal Carter's family, which had been buried by the precinct. This complaint filed by Jamal's mother alleges you harassed her son multiple times before the shooting, targeting him for no reason other than his race. It was dismissed without investigation. Why Crawford's voice was barely a whisper now. "I don't recall every complaint, Senator. We get dozens." Kennedy's tone sharpened. "You seem to recall enough to write aggressive posturing in every report involving black teenagers. 17 arrests in 2 years, 16 of them, black, all with similar language. That's not a coincidence, Detective." The room felt electric, the spectators hanging on every word as Kennedy dismantled Crawford's defenses with surgical precision. Crawford's desperation boiled over his voice, rising to a shout. "You think you can ruin me with some old files and edited recordings? I've kept this community safe for 15 years." Kennedy remained unflinched, his composure a stark contrast to Crawford's unraveling. "Safe for whom, Detective? Not for Jamal Carter, not for Malik Thompson, not for the dozens of kids you've targeted." He turned to the court administrator. "Maria, please prepare the next piece of evidence, a summary of complaints against Detective Crawford, all dismissed by his precinct. Maria nodded, her hands steady as she organized the files, her role in preserving this evidence. A quiet act of courage that had set this moment in motion. As Crawford slumped in the officer's grip, his earlier swagger gone, Kennedy addressed the courtroom. What we've seen today is not just one officer's actions, but a pattern of abuse enabled by silence. Detective Crawford's assault on me was a desperate act to protect his secrets. But those secrets are out now. The senator's eyes scanned the room, meeting the gazes of spectators, many of whom nodded in quiet support. This court will not be intimidated, and the truth will not be buried. Crawford's head dropped, his voice a broken whisper. You planned this whole thing, didn't you? To trap me. Kennedy's response was calm, but devastating. No, detective. You trapped yourself the moment you chose to abuse your power. The room was still, the weight of Kennedy's words settling over everyone. The evidence he had presented, documents, footage, recordings, was just the beginning, but it was enough to crack open the facade of Crawford's authority. The senator's resolve, forged through years of fighting for justice, had turned a moment of violence into a catalyst for truth. As court officers prepared to escort Crawford out, Kennedy glanced at Malik and his mother, offering a small nod of reassurance. The fight was far from over, but the senator's determination promised that justice was coming, not just for Malik, but for every kid Crawford had wronged. The courtroom doors closed behind the detective, his footsteps echoing in defeat, while Kennedy's folder remained open, its contents ready to expose a conspiracy far larger than one man's crimes. The chaos in courtroom 3B had barely settled the echo of Detective Ryan Crawford's assault on Senator John Neely Kennedy, still reverberating through the marble walls. The spectators sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the senator, who stood resolute despite the pain in his side, and the now handcuffed Crawford, whose face was a mask of rage and despair as court officers held him firmly. The air was thick with tension, but Kennedy's calm presence anchored the room, a beacon of determination amid the storm. The folder of evidence on the bench, its pages spilling with damning proof of Crawford's crimes, had already begun to unravel a web of corruption, but what came next would shake the entire city of Louisiana to its core. As Crawford was restrained, the courtroom doors swung open, admitting three figures in dark suits, their movements precise and purposeful. The lead, a stern-faced woman with a badge clipped to her belt, approached the bench with credentials in hand. "Senator Kennedy," she said, her voice steady. "I'm Special Agent Laura Bennett with the FBI's Civil Rights Division. We have warrants for Detective Crawford's arrest on federal charges of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." The room collectively inhaled the weight of federal involvement sinking in. Kennedy nodded, his sharp eyes meeting hers. "Agent Bennett, I trust you've been following today's proceedings." She gave a curt nod. "We have, Senator, and your evidence has given us what we needed to move." Crawford's head snapped up, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is a setup. You can't do this. Internal Affairs cleared me." His protests were drowned out by the rustle of papers as Agent Bennett handed Kennedy a set of federal warrants, their seals glinting under the courtroom lights. Kennedy's voice remained calm, but carried an edge of authority. "Detective, your own words and actions have brought you here. The evidence we've presented. Your reports, your footage, your conversation shows a pattern of abuse that can't be ignored." He turned to the court administrator, Maria Rodriguez, who stood ready with her laptop, her quiet courage a vital part of this moment. "Maria, please display the next piece of evidence for Agent Bennett and the court." Maria nodded, loading a file that projected onto the courtroom's monitor, a spreadsheet detailing Crawford's arrests over the past 2 years, with 16 out of 17 involving black teenagers, all charged with vague offenses like disorderly conduct or resisting. The numbers were stark, undeniable, and the gallery murmured as the pattern became clear. Agent Bennett stepped forward, her voice cutting through the whispers. "Senator, our investigation began 6 months ago after receiving complaints from community leaders about systemic abuse in Crawford's precinct. Your work today has confirmed what we suspected, a coordinated effort to target minority youth and cover it up." Kennedy's eyes narrowed, his mind racing through the implications. He had known Crawford's actions weren't isolated, but the involvement of federal authorities suggested a conspiracy far larger than one rogue officer. "How extensive is your investigation, Agent Bennett?" he asked, his tone measured but urgent. She gestured toward the courtroom doors, where additional agents were entering with briefcases and tablets. "We're executing simultaneous raids on 3 precincts as we speak, seizing computers, files, and surveillance records. We have warrants for 10 officers, including Crawford's supervisor, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes and Captain Robert Morrison, who we believe enabled and encouraged these abuses." Crawford's face went white, his body sagging in the officer's grip. "Morrison, Hayes. You can't touch them." The DA's office backed us. His outburst only deepened the hole he was in, and Kennedy seized the moment. "Detective, you mentioned Lieutenant Hayes. Let's revisit the recording from your conversation with him." He nodded to Maria, who played the audio again, the chilling words filling the room. Crawford's voice, slurred but clear, boasted about teaching kids like Jamal Carter a lesson, while Hayes laughed and assured him the reports would be handled. The gallery gasped, the casual cruelty of the exchange hitting like a physical blow. Angela Thompson. Malik's mother wiped tears from her eyes, her resolve hardening as she heard the men who had terrorized her community discuss their crimes so openly. Kennedy's voice cut through the silence. "This recording, detective, shows you and your supervisor conspiring to falsify reports and intimidate kids. It's not just about you, it's about a system that protected you." Agent Bennett added, "Our raids have already uncovered emails between Hayes and Morrison instructing officers on how to word reports to avoid scrutiny. One email from Morrison to Hayes reads, 'Crawford's latest needs a rewrite. Mention aggressive posturing and officer safety concerns.' This was about Jamal Carter's shooting. The courtroom buzzed with shock, the spectators realizing they were witnessing the exposure of a deeply rooted conspiracy. Kennedy held up another document, a whistleblower's statement from a retired officer who had worked under Morrison. This officer, who risked his career to come forward, states that Morrison ran training sessions teaching officers how to justify excessive force against minority youth. Crawford. You were a model for these tactics, weren't you? Crawford's head dropped, his voice barely audible. I was just doing my job. Kennedy's expression hardened, his voice steady but laced with righteous anger. Your job was to protect, not terrorize. You targeted kids like Jamal Carter and Malik Thompson because of their race, and your superiors helped you cover it up. He turned to Agent Bennett. What's the scope of your operation? She straightened her tone, professional but grim. We've identified 12 officers across 3 precincts involved in similar patterns, fabricated reports, excessive force, and intimidation of witnesses. We're also investigating the district attorney's office for failing to pursue complaints against Crawford's unit. Right now, Captain Morrison is being arrested at his home, and Hayes is in custody at the precinct. Crawford's eyes widened, his voice a desperate whisper. This is impossible. We followed protocol. Kennedy leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Your protocol was a license to abuse, detective, and it ends today. He gestured to Maria, who displayed a new piece of evidence, a log of community complaints against Crawford's precinct, all dismissed without investigation. These complaints filed by families like the Thompsons were buried. Why? Because your precinct prioritized protecting officers over protecting citizens. The gallery stirred voices rising in agreement, as community members who had long felt ignored saw their pain acknowledged. Angela Thompson stood, her voice trembling but strong. My son was harassed for months before this arrest. We filed complaints, but no one listened. Senator Kennedy listened. The room erupted in murmurs of support, and Kennedy offered her a nod, his expression one of quiet solidarity. Agent Bennett's radio crackled with updates from her team. Command Morrison is in custody. Hayes attempted to destroy evidence but was apprehended. We've seized 300 case files and 10 hard drives. The scope of the operation was staggering, and Kennedy's mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about Crawford. It was about dismantling a system that had enabled racial injustice for years. He addressed the courtroom, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the crowd. What we've uncovered today is not just one officer's crimes, but a network of corruption that thrived in silence. Thanks to the courage of whistleblowers, families, and community leaders, that silence is broken. He looked at Malik, who sat wide-eyed beside his mother, and his voice softened. Young man, this court sees you. Your community sees you. And we will not let this injustice stand. Crawford, now slumped in defeat, tried one last defense. You planned this, Senator. You set me up to take the fall. Kennedy's response was calm but devastating. No, detective. You set yourself up when you chose to abuse your power. Every choice you made, every false report, every act of violence led to this moment. He turned to Agent Bennett. What's next for your investigation? She squared her shoulders. We're expanding to other precincts where similar patterns have been reported. We're also working with community groups to ensure transparency. This isn't just about arrests. It's about rebuilding trust. Kennedy nodded, his resolve unshaken, despite the physical pain from Crawford's assault. Then, let's ensure that trust is earned through accountability. As Crawford was led away, his footsteps heavy on the marble floor, the courtroom felt a shift. The evidence Kennedy had presented, documents, recordings, and footage, had cracked open a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the precinct. The senator's courage, his refusal to be intimidated by Crawford's violence, had set in motion a federal investigation that promised to hold every guilty party accountable. Spectators began to whisper, some in awe, others in anger, as they processed the reality of what they had witnessed. Angela Thompson hugged her son, tears of relief mixing with her grief for Jamal Carter and others like him. Kennedy glanced at the folder on the bench, knowing there was more evidence to come, evidence that would expose not just Crawford, but the entire system that had shielded him. The fight for justice was far from over, but today, in this courtroom, a spark had been lit, and Senator John Neely Kennedy stood at its center, ready to see it through. The storm that erupted in courtroom 3B had passed, but its aftershocks reshaped Louisiana's justice landscape. Detective Ryan Crawford, once a towering figure of unchecked authority, now languished in a federal prison cell, convicted on 17 counts of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, sentenced to life without parole. His superiors, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes and Captain Robert Morrison, faced 30- and 45-year sentences for enabling a corrupt system that targeted black youth like Malik Thompson and Jamal Carter. The federal investigation, sparked by Senator John Neely Kennedy's relentless pursuit of truth, had dismantled a network of 12 officers across 3 precincts, with raids uncovering thousands of falsified reports and buried complaints. Outside the courthouse, Kennedy stood before a crowd of community members, his voice steady despite the faint ache from Crawford's assault. "Justice isn't a single victory, it's a promise we keep every day," he said, his words resonating with families who had endured years of silence. His courage had turned a moment of violence into a movement for accountability, proving that one person's stand could topple a corrupt empire. The investigation's reach extended beyond Louisiana, exposing similar abuses in nearby jurisdictions and prompting reforms. New policies mandated body camera transparency, independent complaint reviews, and bias training for officers. Malik Thompson, now 16 and exonerated, emerged as a youth advocate speaking at schools about resilience and rights. Senator Kennedy showed me that truth matters. He told a crowd, his voice firm. His mother, Angela, founded a nonprofit to support victims of police misconduct. Her strength, a beacon for grieving families. Kennedy continued his Senate work championing laws to ensure equitable policing, his courtroom ordeal a powerful example of principled leadership. A memorial garden for Jamal Carter bloomed outside the courthouse, its roses a symbol of hope where families gathered to heal and plan for change. Community meetings with police replaced fear with dialogue, and crime dropped as trust grew. The lesson was clear: justice demands courage and persistence. Kennedy's refusal to bow to Crawford's violence showed that one person standing firm could spark systemic change. "We fight for what's right, no matter the cost," he told activists, his words inspiring action. Malik mentored younger kids, teaching them to know their rights, while Angela's foundation helped dozens of families seek justice. The case became a cornerstone in law schools, a study in confronting institutional abuse. The local police department, under federal oversight, adopted reforms that became a national model, emphasizing accountability over cover-ups. The cultural shift was profound. Silence was no longer an option. As Malik said, "Courage is doing what's right, even when you're scared." Senator Kennedy proved that. The garden's plaque read, "Truth prevails when courage endures." Kennedy, pausing there one evening, saw Jamal's name etched in stone, a reminder of why he fought. The story of his stand, a senator who faced violence and exposed corruption, showed that change begins with one voice refusing to be silenced. Crawford's downfall taught that no badge could shield injustice forever, and Kennedy's resolve ensured a community could heal and thrive.